But during that night, my blood pressure didn't come up for hours. And so I was just hovering in this sort of doorstep of death place. And at some point, I left my body and I felt myself just flying through this sea of stars, just these beautiful colored orbs. And they were just showering me with emotion of acceptance and joy and welcoming and praise. And I was just being paraded through the center of this, and they were parting. And all I could feel was this welcoming. And it just felt amazing. I felt like I'd been released from a hot, stuffy closet. And I was this huge, expanded cloud. It's like I went on forever. And I kept thinking, how in the world did I believe I was this person? It seemed like it was such an incredible trick that I was convinced that I was this dude.
Guest today is Bill Letson, who had a near death experience when he was a firefighter and he inhaled some type of infection that caused him to leave his body. I'm super excited to talk to him today because he's discovered so much more than just what this NDE is. I feel like he's opened a portal and a door, and that's where we're going to go with this. Bill, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Lori. Thanks for having me. It's a great honor.
I'm glad. So, why don't we go ahead and start with what your life was like before you had this NDE experience?
It was average guy, you know. I grew up here in California on the coast and played sports in high school, a C student, a surfer, and after I went to Cal Poly and was a forestry major and got interested. I took a class in fire science, fire fighting. And then I ended up coming back from the beach, ended up at this fire, and we helped this woman save her home. And I was hooked for life. I was about 19. And the fire department showed up and they said, "We got a job for you." And so I got on a hotshot crew with Santa Barbara County in the 70s. And then I was with the Forest Service for a while, and then I retired from Santa Barbara County in 2010 as a captain.
Wow,
And
thank
it
you so
was,
much for your service.
you're welcome. It was my pleasure. I just loved the helping others. That was really huge service to others and was exciting and it was dangerous. And I don't know, I never grew up really. Firemen don't really grow up. They, anybody will tell you that.
I
So yeah,
love about Go ahead.
it was a great career. And yeah, that thing that happened we were talking about, that was in 94. And somebody asked me about the details, and it was called the Beijing flu, and it actually exceeded the CDC's epidemic limits. So it was considered an official epidemic for a few weeks in 94. And there's other NDEers that got that illness in that time frame in the Western United States. And it was really a powerful flu. It'd knock you down.
Wow. Going back to that experience you had real quick where you happen to be on a beach where there's a fire happening and because you took this class, you go up there and with shovels, I know that you moved the dirt around and saved this woman's house and she had kids and pets. And I just want to speak to, I just don't believe that there are accidents. And I think it's so interesting how people wind up in something and you do this. And then obviously the whole fire department gets called. They recognize something in you. And the next thing you know, you have a career that's way different than surfing and you're in service. And this just becomes a big part of your life. And then you step into this place to be in this exact place to have this near death experience. So before I ask you to talk about that, I'm curious, do you feel like you planned those events before you came here based on what you know?
Yeah, this is for everybody. Everybody's life is got some script to it. It's got some synchronicities built into it. that when we see it, we realize that it really is a play. And it's interesting that you focused on that woman, and because she was in her 30s. I was driving home from the beach and I pulled over and I just had like board shorts on and I scrambled up the hill. I could see the smoke. And as I came through the brush and stuff, she was on her porch. Just she had a couple of babies and a dog and a bunch of puppies. And she was really flipping out. And I didn't know much. I'd had just a class, but I knew I could do something and got the hose and got the shovel. And we turned the fire away from the house. And it was 19 and I got hired right after that. And then I had this long career, 35 years or something. And then just before I retired, there was a fire in that same area. It was 2 months before I retired. And I was the first in on the first in engine. And so we had a barn on fire and the main house was starting to burn and guest house was burning. And so we had to call all this equipment. And then there was a brush fire taking off from the house going up the hill. And one of the engines came in and it's, dude, check that main house for anybody. And so they went in and this woman that was 80 years old was in the back bedroom. And the house was full of smoke, but they knocked the fire down and they they rolled her out. And the captain called me. He said, "Hey, you got to come over and check this out, man. This was close." And so I came over and here's this lady laying there. And I took her hands and I go, how are you, sweetheart? How are you doing? And she just sat up and she had this incredible look on her face of astonishment. And she was just staring at me. And her kids came over and they said she had a stroke. She can't talk. She can't communicate very well. And it's okay. We got an ambulance coming and all this. And so I went back to doing my thing. And one of those kids, which was one of those babies back in the 70s, he came over and he said, "Hey man, thanks a lot. I saved the home I was born in and all this stuff, and you guys are great." And I said, "We got Red Cross coming, and we'll house you guys that lost your home." And he said, "I want to thank you for that other time too." And I said, I get emotional. And I was like, what other time?" And he goes, "That time in the 70s, you were here. You were that super surfer my mom told us all about." And I said, "Oh, that's right. I knew this looked familiar." And I said, "How do you know?" And he said, "My mom told me." And I go, how does she know that I'm that guy? And he said, "She looked in your eyes." That is how powerful we are with our connection with this higher thing of us. There's so much more going on here. Yeah, I'll never forget that. And then a couple of months later, I retired. But that was at the onset and then at the end, and it was the same two souls.
Wow.
Isn't
What
that
an
awesome?
incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that on so many levels. Wow.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. And I walked away from that, and all the guys were like, "Man, this is crazy. You weren't even supposed to be on duty. The other truck got lost, and you ended up first in, and none of this would have happened." I was held on duty because it was a bad fire season. And I was just like, this has been the script. I really knew that just by the look on her face. It went back 35, 40 years. It went back instantly. That time never existed. And it really never did.
They say time is a persistent illusion, right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, okay, you're a firefighter and you have this experience in 1994. So what happened?
Yeah, we were running calls. I was at Station 11 down in Santa Barbara, running calls, normal. And this flu was kicking butt around the county. And it was coming in waves. And we went to a number of calls that day. And one of them was this lady who we went to the call, and it was from her neighbors called in and said she was ill a few days ago. We haven't seen her, and she's in there. And they were adamant. And it checked out. Her car was there, and the papers were piling up. And so we kicked the door in and found her in the back bedroom, and she was close to, leaving this world. But we got sprung into action, got her going, medics, and I put a mask on her, and she woke up and had this big exhale, and I breathed it all in. And so then I had the Beijing flu. I knew it immediately after that, and I felt it some hours later. And 2 days later, I was super sick. I was just like her. It was hard to get out of bed, and my heart was just racing. My blood pressure was, I couldn't get a pulse on my wrist. My blood pressure was tanking. And I called for help, and I tried to speak into the phone, and it was just a whisper. And my little niece knew it was me. And so she called 911, and the guys came, got me in an ambulance, got IVs going, got me to the hospital. And it was full of people. And there was kids and old people that were really hurting. So I was set aside. And after a couple of bags, I was feeling pretty good. My wife was there by then, and some of the fire guys were hanging out. And I was trying to talk the nurse into letting me slip out. And we got past this critical thing and got rehydrated. I figured I could fight it from there. But she came in and said the doctor prescribed this to everybody. So it was a couple of injections. One was Nubane, which was a morphine. I think it was an early version of fentanyl, this synthetic morphine. And it wasn't much. It was probably 5 milligrams or something. And the other thing was for nausea. And I argued with her. I told her, I'm not in pain and I don't have nausea. And she goes, look, we're trying to stay ahead of this whole thing here. Just cooperate. And I'm like, okay. And she pushed it in, but she was in a hurry, and she pushed it in. And my wife said the plunger on the IV on the shot went down, and you went down at almost the same instant. And she said your eyes rolled back and you were gone. And the whole place went into a panic, and they Narcaned you within seconds, and they Narcaned you a few more times, and they got a blood pressure of 40 over zero, and they packed you up and sent you up to intensive care so they could monitor everything. And because you weren't coming back, but you also weren't kicking the bucket. So I think they assumed that I was going to be a coma guy for a while, that it was some kind of shock. Because when I woke up the next morning, this was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When I woke up the next morning, the nurse was like, we didn't know what was happening with you. We didn't know where this was going, why you were so far gone, why you were so ill. And we couldn't figure it out. And she was just stoked that I was back. But during that night, my blood pressure it didn't come up for hours. And so I was just hovering in this sort of doorstep of death place. And at some point, I left my body, and I felt myself just flying through this sea of stars, just these beautiful colored orbs. And they were just showering me with emotion of acceptance and joy and welcoming and praise. And I was just being paraded through the center of this, and they were parting. And all I could feel was this welcoming. And it just felt amazing. And I felt like I'd been released from a hot, stuffy closet. And I was this huge, expanded cloud. It's like I went on forever. And I kept thinking, how in the world did I believe I was this person? It seemed like it was such an incredible trick that I was convinced that I was this dude, Bill. And he had this whole story, this whole personality and these relationships and family and his history and what his expectations were. All of that was gone. And it was a seamless change into this other expanded awareness, this other being. And it was effortless and painless. And I was still me. I was absolutely at my core, still me. I had the same sense of humor, the same voice that sort of narrates our day, tells us all right, you're hungry. Why don't you find some lunch? And you got this other thing to take care of later. And that voice that we're always talking to ourselves, that was seamless. But I was somebody else and I was somewhere else. And I don't know if for your audience, this whole thing with death, we get a really crazy perspective here of what we see happen to ourselves when we leave our bodies. But from my perspective, it was nothing had happened. I was just this bigger version of me that I've always been, and I was somewhere else. So as I flew along with those orbs all around me, and I was just, this is incredible, this is wonderful. And it was this euphoria, this absolute ecstatic bliss that was a full-time vibe. And I've used the word cosmic orgasm uh, every time I told this story. And that doesn't even come close to it. It was this standing wave of euphoria. Um, and I couldn't believe you could feel that good all the time. And so I was flying along, just loving all of it and just happy to be home and everything, you just want to fit back in and you just want to give back to the collective. That is here we've got all these aspirations for what we want to do in our life, what we want to accomplish, and that drops away. You just want to fit in and give back. That's what I felt. Um, so I'm flying along, just loving life, and all of a sudden everything changed again. And I was in this like clinic. It was a solid place, and there was lighting there and equipment around. And right in front of me, there were these three short little hooded guys. And they were overjoyed to see me. They were bouncing around like little munchkins. They were joyful and playful. And they were saying things like, "What did you learn? What can you tell us? What did you see?" And I was really super confused. And I was just looking at them. And one of them bounced forward. They were like these clumsy little guys. They looked just like those short little guys in the movie Communion with Christopher Walken when he finds himself in this facility type thing. I think it's like an alien abduction story, but um, I think the alien abduction story, at least in that case, is off. I think there is this place that we go and we get checked up, we get tuned up, and that's what people are experiencing. And it's really nothing but love and kindness and friendliness coming from them. But they also, they have a job to keep us going in the simulation. And we get confused about that. But yeah, those guys looked exactly like those guys in the movie Communion. And it's not a horror story. If you watch those guys in that movie, they never do anything horrible. They're bouncing around, they're high-fiving him, they're dancing with him, they're comical, they're sweethearts. And that's what I experienced. And one of them came forward and he looked me up and down because I think I was just sitting there staring back at him, very confused. And then he turned to the other two and he said, he doesn't remember us. And they all giggled uproariously and were bouncing around. And then, but kind of in the background, there was this tall, wispy guy. And he came forward and I've called him all kinds of things like a walking stick, insect, or a stretched out Gumby, but he was this sliver of a guy and he had this spinning energy all around him. I called him the tall, wispy guy. And as he came forward, he had this big smile, and you could tell he was just super stoked to see me. And more than that, you could feel his love for me. It was like a child and a parent, a father. And as he came forward, that spinning energy engulfed me, and my throat clamped down, and my chest was going to explode. And I felt like I was going to drop to my knees and break down crying from love. There was so much love coming from this guy that it was overwhelming. And he came forward and all he did was chuckle. I said some things and he would chuckle at them. And then the little guys were giggling. And this went on for a while. I was looking around, I go, man, this is not very organized at all. And I said something like, you guys want to get on with this, whatever we do here, review my life or whatever. And he just cracked up. And he said, sure, we can do that. How do you want to start? And I thought, this is good. I'd like to check out of this clinic and get back to that other dimension, those with those orbs, because in that dimension, nothing was impossible. Everything was available. That was the sense I got. It was lacking for nothing. It was absolutely complete. Some people call this the void, where they feel incredibly complete. Yeah, they weren't doing anything. And I said, you want to review my life? Was that? And the big guy just cracked up. He just, the tall, wispy guy, he said, sure, let's do that. And so I started telling some stories. One of them was nothing big like that. I had some criminal background or something. I didn't have anything like that. But the one thing I brought up was that right out of college, I got offered this job on an island off the coast of California with the Park Service. And my wife, she never complains about anything, but she wanted that. She said, why don't you take that job? Because when are we going to get a chance to live on an island by ourselves and be these rangers? And I, I was a young guy. I wanted to go to fires. I love the camaraderie and the excitement and all that. And so I took a fire job. I'm almost 70 now. And if that job sounds pretty good now, plus I could make it up to her. She's
I love the both parts of that.
because she's pretty cool, and that'd be a great present. Maybe something will happen. But after a while, then nobody was listening. Nobody was paying attention. The little guys were bouncing around and they were bumping into each other, and like the Three Stooges, they were just jovial and stuff. And he was watching them and chuckling and then looking at me and seeing that I'm confused, and he'd chuckle at that. And then he just like it was time to go home or something. He came over and he said, okay, that's enough. Time to go back. And that just blew my mind. I was like, go back? I'm not going back there. Are you crazy? That place is rough, man. And he says, you have to go back. You got things to do and they're important. And I tried a few things. I said, I was almost 40. I was in my late 30s. And I said, I'm almost 40. I'm pretty much done anyway. And let's just call it good. And he laughed at that. And then I said, I really won't be that missed. My wife will be sad for a while and my parents, but they'll come out of it. They're tough people. They'll persevere. And he thought that was pretty funny too. And he's, no, you got to go back. And as he stepped forward, I noticed the three little guys were gone. Their part was over for that show and tell. I think that's what it was. It was a show and tell. And I was being shown these other dimensions that are part of our experience here. And the three little guys were gone. And then he stepped forward and he said, okay, you're going back. And just with his intention, the whole dimension started to break up. The room started to come apart, spin away. He evaporated. And, my frequency, my vibration dropped tremendously. And it was a falling away, dropping out of that dimension. And I fell away into darkness. And I realized I was near my body and I felt this very lonely, dismal, unhappy place, which I think is right next to where we are in the physical. I think we're supposed to navigate this place and raise our vibration and earn our wings and move into those higher dimensions. I think that's what we're doing here. It's all this whole graduating from this earth school, it's on us. And you and I talked before we started, we talked about this fear thing with plant medicine and how devastating that is. And I think that is a challenge ahead of us when we leave our bodies, is that fear thing. We have to have control of it um, when we pull out of here. Uh, so then I was back in my body and I could see the machines, and vital signs were improving. I kept falling asleep, waking up, falling asleep. And then it was still dark. I could stay awake, and a nurse walked by and she was shocked. She said, "You're awake?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Man, we didn't know what was going on with you." And I said, "I need to talk to you." And she said, "I need to go get everybody. And we've been worried all night and they need to know you're back." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. You can go get everybody. But first," and I wanted, I mean, this was really important to me. I wanted to know, I go, what am I doing back here? I wanted somebody to tell me that, because you went from this divine existence back into what we're doing here, back into this container. And the containers are full of baggage, emotional baggage and energies that we carry with us. And hopefully we can work through them. That's something we're supposed to do. But I was loaded back up with all Bill's stuff. And it was super rough. It was super rough. And so I wanted to, she couldn't answer that question, but I said, what am I doing back here? I was home. I was so pissed. I was so sad instantly. I was home. I was out of here. I was back where I belong. And I said, I had bought the farm, and the nurses are pretty clever. And she was like, honey, you were in escrow, but you fell out of escrow and now you're back with us. And she got in my face, you just like eye to eye. And she said, you're back with it, and you need to get your head around that. And that was that was a really amazing gift, because I never forgot that soul to soul conversation. And a lot of my NDE bros, they didn't have that. They kind of back in that sadness, and it leads to depression. It leads to addiction, and that's not an uncommon story. Um, but yeah, she slapped me right back into Bill, and I was sad for a few days, but I had to get off the couch and go back to work, and I had my head around that. I was really thankful about that, looking back. And everybody I talked to said you're a lunatic. You're talking about these little munchkin guys and this tall, wispy, spinning whirlpool guy, and those things don't exist. And I went back to work, and the guys would ask me, and I would tell them. I wouldn't hold back at all. I told everybody. It wasn't like I was ashamed of the story, because the story was real. And why would you be ashamed of the truth? So I told everybody, and it leaked down from the chief's office. We don't want our firemen sounding like lunatics. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. I get it. That's fair. And so I just dummied up. I just zipped it. And I got back into the Bill character and had a blast. I had a wonderful career and all kinds of things. I didn't know what to make of that experience, but I knew it was real. I knew it wasn't some dream or anything, but I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't run in woo circles and, you know, like crystal people and stuff like that. I didn't know how to talk to them.
Which
So
is funny because aren't you living in California? I'm just kidding. Sorry, California.
I could never get past the the whole thing with the guy wearing a wizard outfit or something. I was so structured at the fire department, and you wore a uniform, and everybody acted the same. They're all the same. And so yeah, it was super structured. And in retirement, that dropped away. I think we were talking. I went down to Costa Rica and I lived with a international hippie community off the grid in the jungle. And I did that for off and on for years. I'd go back for weeks or months, and got into this whole thing with silence and stillness and back to nature and raising your vibration through how you eat and how you think and how you appreciate the world and the kind of water you drink. And these things, they're all really important for us to realize who we really are, because we're really separated from that now. But yeah, so 2010, I retired. And before I started going to Costa Rica, I stumbled onto the video by Rick Strassman, called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And I was a happy retiree. I had my life bicycling and playing in bands and surfing. And when I read that book, it took my feet out from under me, because in chapter 13 and 14, it's called Contact Through the Veil. And his volunteers that he was injecting with DMT, they were going to the same sort of facility and seeing the three short hooded guys that were playful and joyful and familiar, and a taller, wispier being that was in the background who would come forward and was very loving. And that was in their reports over and over. And I literally dropped the book. And I remember walking around the house here, property, for a week. I have to cut wood and stuff. And I'd be walking around going, what is going on with this place? My thing was real. I got really ill, really sick, close to death. Something fired off and I left my body and I went to this place. But I didn't have any DMT. Nobody gave me DMT. And he was recreating this death experience in his experiments with the University of New Mexico, and 400 volunteers, and a majority of them were seeing the same guys and having the same fun experience, lighthearted. And that that threw me for a loop. And I don't know where this came from, but I started traveling to Guanacaste, Costa Rica, the Nicoya Peninsula. That's a blue zone. That's the closest blue zone to us.
Mm.
And I was staying there for months at a time. And I was in some of the towns, and then the roads turned to dirt roads. And then I was on the trails, and then I was in the villages, and I was hanging out with shaman and these international hippies that were in love with the Native American wisdom of appreciation and gratitude for our path and our natural world, the just reverence for the natural world and all the natural things that live in it. And that went on for about 3 years. And there's an ayahuasca. I did ayahuasca in 2013. I did it a handful of times, and that can be pretty gnarly. I sort of went easy a couple of times, but twice I hit it hard. Not bufo toad hard, but and you're gonna add to this. But I mean, I hit it hard to where it was 3 or 4 hours of just misery, just moaning on, rolling around on the ground and drooling, and just waves of fear. And you drink the ayahuasca, and then there's like an hour, and then there's this purge. And I felt like I was being punched in the stomach in all these different places in my body. And I was told later that the medicine was grabbing all that energy and bringing it to your stomach. And at right and around that hour, the whole ceiling just opened up, and there was this incredible spiral that went out into the distance forever. And all these lights were coming off of that spiral. They were shining down. It's like a DNA strand, DNA strand. And these lights were lights like I've never seen before, colors I'd never seen. Um, I mean, obviously there was an intelligence that was on the other side sending messages. It comes in light energy. And I was getting downloaded. It was going right in my forehead. It was like I was being held down. And I woke up over my bucket and I just I had this, I hurled into this bucket and it was mostly air. It was like this roaring sound, like a jet engine, and really incredibly hard. And what I saw come out of me was this black, purple, dark blue mist or vapor, or it was like a gel mist, not of this world. And it went over the bucket and then it went out onto this pavilion floor. And the shaman saw it immediately and he told one of his assistants to go sweep that out into the jungle. This is this emotional baggage. I was told a year later it was an emotional entity full of stuff that makes us ill. But I turned around, I watched this thing undulate across the floor, and I turned around and I go, what is happening? Because, like I said, it was not of this world. And um, that was probably the most remarkable moment of my life. And I realized whatever that was, it was clinging to me and it just left. And, those ceremonies are kind of gnarly. And it took a day to recover. But the second day, I went for a run. And usually I run 7 miles through Guiones and Nasara. And I ran my route there 3 times. I never got tired. I never got winded. And I was leaving on a fourth time, and one of my friends goes, "Dude, you've been running since it was noon. It's like you've been running since 8 o'clock this morning." And I'm like, "I'm not even tired." And those that energy was a major burden. We all carry them, and that's why it's called a healing ceremony. We
Mm.
unload that baggage, and our body is just like free.
Wow.
So,
I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go back in a minute and I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions about the NDE. But while we're right here, you brought up somebody. You brought up Dr. Rick Straussman. So I actually met him 5 years ago in person. He was in Sedona. He was with Graham Hancock. And I
wow.
too read that book. But because one of the things for me is that I needed to really understand what psychedelics were, because I grew up in an era where psychedelics were your brain's on drugs, you're going to jump out of a window into an empty pool and kill yourself. It was very much that propaganda that was put out because people in power didn't want people not in power to actually wake up to the power of who they were. So you're in a really unique perspective. So the first thing I want to ask you about that is, number one, those people in those studies who had the same experiences with I'm going to call them tinkers because they're sometimes referred to as tinkers on the other side, and the wispy person, and you were so floored that somebody had had that experience without a near death experience. Will you explain to everybody why they would have had that experience with the DMT and the pineal gland?
Yeah, we have a pineal gland, and it's mostly turned off for most of us in the world today. And it is a little tiny gland. It's called the seat of the soul. It's called the third eye, and it's a hollow gland, and it has rods and cones in it, just like our eyeball. And it's filled with this water that's infused with the energy of the sun, this piezoelectric water. And when a vibration kicks in the pineal gland, and everything is energy and vibration and frequency. And when this vibration reaches our pineal gland, reaches our brain, then it puts it into motion and it makes this dimethyltryptamine. It makes DMT. Every living thing has DMT, makes DMT. And the DMT, at night when we all sleep, a little drop goes on your brain, and we soul travel, we dream, we travel to other dimensions. And when we die, it splashes a huge amount on the brain. Once the body gets to a place where the intelligence of the body says, this guy's done. Um, then it'll kick in and it'll splash the brain with DMT and rocket the soul out of the body or inward into this mental dimension that we come from, or who knows how to define it. But yeah, that's what happens. And so Rick Strassman was mimicking the death process by injecting them with pure DMT and activating, it hits the brain and it activates that soul leaving the body. And that's what I think that's what they were experiencing. Can you explain it better?
Yeah,
I know
no,
I'm all
I
over.
like that. I haven't read that book for a really long time. I couldn't have even probably come up with a fourth of what you did. You did such a beautiful job explaining it. The only thing I would add is one of the biggest things I got from that book that he said was that you can't OD on this DMT because your body makes it naturally. It is a psychedelic, but it's not something that could be addictive. And for people, it is naturally produced in your brain. They think it 3 times. So, one, soul enters the body. Two, you die, soul leaves the body. Or three, like you having a near death experience or somebody ingesting a plant or animal medicine. So, in my case, 5-MeO-DMT is a bufo, the toad. It's a medicine as well, but it's not a plant based, where ayahuasca is a combination of two different types of plants, one that is poisonous and one that allows you to ingest the DMT, and it's a plant medicine. So it acts a little bit differently. That's a longer acting, 5-MeO-DMT is a shorter acting. But I want you to share with everybody. We talked for quite a bit before we started this interview. Share with everybody what you believe the DMT is for people.
Yeah, I believe that the DMT is a doorway. It's a portal back to the dimension that we come from, that we're in this really cool simulation, it's a huge gift, this hologram, and it's all energy driven. It's all held together. The molecules, atoms are spinning millions of times a second. And even when you get down to the nucleus, it's just spinning faster than the rest of it. And there's really nothing there. It's like a big light show, and we call it physical world. And we're these incredible beings, and we're projecting our awareness through these characters that we're playing temporarily. And yeah, there's 3 ways that you can really get a look at the other side. And when you said this, when you get a look at the other side, life changes because you know you don't have any enemies, that you're perfect in every way, and there's never been any problems. And this is all just fun. And when we figure that out, everything disappears. And the world's moving back into a silver and a gold age, to where that is our full-time concern, is looking after each other and helping everyone have a wonderful experience here. Obviously, right now that is not focus,
Well,
but
if anybody got far enough in this video where you're still here, you're still watching as we're having our deeper conversation, which, is a little different than the traditional near death experience. I will say that you can go to my website, lorimicah.com, and check out my retreats page. And you can read between the lines with the retreats that I'm going to be hosting in my personal residence. Anyway, I do have questions I want to ask you about your near death experience, because you do have a very unique perspective. And one of the things I really want to ask you is, one of the first things you said is that when you first got there, you felt like you were being welcomed and you were being paraded. So when you said those words, paraded, it made me feel like you're in the center, you're going down the street, you're lined on both sides, and there are these beings that are welcoming you. So if you can describe a little bit about what those beings look like, if they had any type of, I know that sometimes words are difficult and we don't have physical features, and you've also mentioned orbs, but who were those beings? What were they? Why were they interested in welcoming you? And what did they look like?
in the Wizard of Oz, you see that Glenda arrives.
Yes, my
Purple,
favorite scene.
she's this purple swirling um, orb, and So what I think they are is ancestors, family, friends, pets. Um, there's hundreds and thousands of them that are just watching all of us all the time. That's what that movie, The Truman Show, is about. He's being watched all the time, and he's got all these decisions. Is he going to make the higher vibration decision, or is he going to make the lower vibration? And the whole town is scheming for him to have his adventure. That's The Truman Show means the true man show. This is what we're really doing here.
You're blowing my mind. I've
There's,
never heard anybody say this before. And as soon as you did it, it was like light bulb. Of course, that makes so much sense.
yeah, that's what there. Yeah, I was telling you that I'm slowly slipping into this blissful old fool. And when I go outside and I look in the blue sky, it's like I'm in a snow globe with glitter all around, shooting everywhere. These are conscious beings. We are conscious beings. We're just on the stage right now, and they're all enjoying our successes and hoping for the best. They're not judging us or anything like that. They're just sharing in our adventure. It's a wonderful gift. And
I love that.
and so it's just you were blown away by Truman. So I just told you my near-death experience, and I figured this. I came to this conclusion a few months ago that we all, back in the day, we all watched The Wizard of Oz once a year. It came on a Sunday night,
Yes. Oh my gosh,
and
I arranged my whole schedule. One time I was babysitting and I made the girl I was babysitting come to my house because they didn't have cable, so I didn't miss the Wizard of Oz. Because you guys that are watching that don't have the memories we do, where you had to like put time out to watch a show. You didn't have. I'm gonna go on Netflix and watch whatever I want today because that
right,
didn't exist.
right,
Yeah, I love that
right.
memory. Yes.
So the whole country gathered around the TV, and we watched The Wizard of Oz every year. It was a regular, like, Christmas. And these movies, they're there to help us. And once we get along far enough along in our journey, our education, these things pop out. They jump out as to what they're really saying. And in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy is in this black and white world, and it's a crappy existence, a dusty town, and there's a mean old lady that wants to take her dog from her. And along comes the Twister, this storm, and she ends up in a house, and the house gets pulled off when it's flying around, and she's in there, and the window comes off and hits her in the head, and then she falls on the bed, and she's this lighter version of her peels away, and Dorothy is then after that in a near-death experience.
I
And
never
that
ever thought of it that way, but oh my gosh, you're right.
everybody says the same thing. I love doing it because you seekers, you guys put a good effort into figuring things out. And when I can flip a switch like that, I just love it because it's wow. This is going to open some huge doors. So anyway, she comes away and she's in a near-death experience. And then she lands in this magical place, open the door, and it's full color. And there's these beautiful giant flowers full of color, full of life. There's music floating on the air. There's water flowing through the whole town. And she's walking around. And there's these giggling little munchkins. And they come towards her in threes. And that lollipop guild, that is exactly like the feeling I got from the three guys that I saw. They were joyful and playful. They got a little, spunk to them, and they come to her in groups of three. And Linda shows up in this beautiful orb. Linda is Dorothy's higher self, and she's very sweet to her and very kind, and gets her on her journey on the yellow brick road. And the name Dorothy means gift from God.
What?
So, so that Dorothy that's us. We are a gift from God to have this experience. And Linda's always there when Dorothy gets into trouble with the witch or whatever Dorothy appears in the sky looking at her, always watching her. Our higher self's always watching after us, and gets her on the road, and she meets the straw man who needs a brain, and the tin man needs a heart, and the lion needs courage. And what that tells me very, very clearly is that we need to get control of our brain and give the left side a break and go with that right divine side that connected to creativity and art and music and flow and the divine. Go with our right brain and make those higher choices and live our life from the intelligence of the heart and move through this world with courage, without fear. And we get to go home. And there's no place like home.
Well,
Isn't that
Bill, this
cool?
is a horse of a different color.
There are so many. So the last lady I talked to, she said, then that whole thing with the wizard, that's religion with this fire and brimstone, and that's
That's
organized religion.
hilarious.
And I'm like, yeah, I think you're onto something.
And then we look behind the curtain, and what do we see?
See a sweet old guy.
Right.
We're all sweet old
Wow.
guys. We're all
Blow my mind
sweethearts.
today.
We're all sweethearts. We're just pretending to. And I talked about that thing where I had that bluish black stuff come out of me, and they always talk about drinking, using structured water. Get water that's flowed across the magnetic Mother Earth and had the sun beat on it and gets structured, gets back to that water, that how water should really be, because our water is really strange. And Dorothy, at the end there, she throws the bucket of water accidentally on the witch and cleanses that whole thing, that whole guilt of killing her sister, the other witch. And this is why we're told to pay attention to water, because it moves in and it collects those energies, those wicked energies, and melts them away, just like the witch. That's what I think, at least.
Wow. Well, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I'm so
Yeah,
glad you shared that today. I'm gonna really be thinking about that. And I've been drawn to that movie since I was a little kid. I You don't know why you're drawn to things, and then you find out later, oh, this is gonna be, I don't know, it was a breadcrumb from the younger
right.
self, from the younger version. Okay, so this happened 30 years ago. It seems to me that your details are spot on even 30 years later. So, has this changed for you over time, or have you gotten different or more insights from it, or is it as clear as it was when it happened?
It's as clear as it was when it happened. Those faces looking back at me, the bouncing around. When the tall, wispy guy came forward, his smile was so authentic. His eyes were up, his eyebrows were up, his smile was ear to ear. He was overjoyed. He was ecstatic. Yeah,
And did
and
you do
I
that?
think that's my Glenda. I think that's a higher self that um, I was brought into that in between place, that facility where we get tuned up or whatever. And he was there to be a part of what that seed planting, and that's what it was. It was planting a seed, and then I could talk about it in these times now when it's so important. Uh, People really need to get their head around who they are, what's going on. We're being prepared for something that's coming. And I guess the message is there's never anything to fear. We're never we never become anything more than perfect. And this has been the illusion.
What do you think is coming?
Well, the precession of the equinox. You've heard of this? Um,
I just did a whole video that I just released this week about the equinox energy. Of course, you would bring this up. This is the second time today this has come up from a random person. Okay, go ahead. This is just nuts to me, but yes.
yeah, so the precession of the equinox is a 24,000 year cycle where the all the astrological signs parade through a certain place. And the pyramids at Giza, they point to the horizon. And there's so much knowledge there. Graham Hancock, he's written several books on the messages that are there with the Great Pyramid, and the they're aligned to the Orion's belt in the sky. And it's telling us that as above, so below. And when you start getting your head around these things, you realize that this isn't a bunch of fairy tales. This is a real thing. We've just got really bad information with religion and history and science and modern culture, pop culture. We think we have all the answers, but it's just a big empty bag. There's none of those things mean anything. The world is incredibly magical and alive, and we're not alone and these crappy little beings that nobody cares about. It's exact opposite.
Yeah,
So
especially when I hear you say thousands of souls are watching what we do and they're like cheering and waiting for us to make a decision and hoping that we'll make one from the place of love and not one from the place of fear.
yeah, that's true. And so the procession is, each astrological sign has 2,000 years, and that adds up to 24,000 years. And that's known as the great year. We call it an eon, 24,000 years. And that calendar is part of the Mayans, the Baktuns, and it's also the Hindus. They called it the yugas, and they talked about a iron age and a bronze age and a silver age and a gold age. And 2012, there's some wiggle room there with the experts, but 2012 was the bottom of that wheel, of that cycle. And anybody who's was paying attention in 2013, because it was the end of 2012, 2013, everything changed. The village that I was staying down in Costa Rica, they couldn't build casitas fast enough for the kids that were coming from all over the world. They didn't even know why they were coming there. They This energy, this light started coming back into the world. And we're gonna slowly, over the centuries, we're going to climb back to these wonderful beings that nature comes first, and honorable professions, and looking after each other and looking after our own energy, these things with organic food and water and being close to the earth. All of that will become a priority, and our ways are going to disappear. And that's cool. It's happened. This cycle has gone on forever.
I'm glad that you brought this up. Back in 2012, I read Greg Braden's book, Fractal Time, and he talked about exactly that the end of 2012 was a cycle where the Earth reached the furthest place, the furthest spot away from the sun, and we felt the most alone. And now we're in this, it took 24 years for that to start to come back, but now we're starting to feel more and more connected. And if you look around, you're a little bit older than me, but it wasn't like this 20 years ago. People
oh
that were
no.
friends did not say, I love you. And now everybody is so much kinder, so much more open. And then your cat just walked behind you. It's just, it's different. And I feel the difference. And I think a lot of people, if you really think about it, feel the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, it's real. It's The light is coming back into our world, and people are waking up. The people that are listening to your podcast, this is, I don't know, a fraction of 1% of the world, but it's only going to grow. There, there's going to be more and more visions in the sky, and people are going to say, "Oh, this science story doesn't fit. There's something else." And they're going to start looking for answers from kooks like you and me.
I love it. I love it. I'm so grateful for you because I know you got shut down 30 years ago when you were telling this story, and now you're in a place where you get to talk about it, and I'm just grateful that you want to and feel compelled to share your story with the world. I feel like I've studied so much and I learned a couple things today that I didn't know. And I love it when that happens. And these conversations feed my soul. It has been it's my honor to be able to talk to you and help bring your story out into the collective consciousness.
Yeah, I'm honored too. You're the Bofu woman. You're you're
What's
you're
funny is
fearless.
before our interview started, I didn't know this, but Bill watched an interview that I did a couple of years ago where I talked about my some of my journeys. So it was a full circle cool thing today.
Yeah, you're
So
uncommon, fearless. Very
oh,
uncommon.
thank you.
Mo
Thank you.
most people go into a ayahuasca, and I don't recommend it, but most people go into an ayahuasca ceremony and get blown up, and maybe they come back and maybe they don't, because it is such a shock. But you went into that toad thing and you are like a little kid afterwards. You're like, oh, this happened and that happened. And I'm like, where's the fear? Where's the trauma? Where's you know, the injury? And but you don't have any. You don't use fear. You're doing good, man.
Thank you. It definitely changed my perception in ways that I can't even describe with words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're open to people connecting to you. Do you have anything that you want the audience to know about that you've worked on or that you're working on?
There's a site, I have a playlist on YouTube that kind of tells it's a short little narrative. And then there's a whole bunch of videos. You and I talked about all the stars that are out there, all the NDEers and people that have these events and they're helping. And
Yeah.
so I put them all in an order and it's a good story if people are interested.
Okay. What is it?
It's called, strangely enough, it's called NDE, DMT, and Kundalini, and by my name. And
Love it. That's wonderful. So everybody go and check that out because Bill, as you can tell, is a wealth of knowledge. I mean, you know your stuff. You've studied stuff and you've retained it and you've made some amazing insights and connected some dots. And hopefully everybody listening today was able to follow along. And I know I'm going to check out a couple of different things and you've given me some food for thought for sure.
yeah, I can't take credit for any kind of research or any kind of breakthroughs. Like I was telling you, if I sit quietly, the colors start swirling around me and there's bliss and I'm these little pearls of wisdom that are coming from somewhere else and it comes through me. And that's the truth.
Well, I say keep them coming. Keep them coming.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and insights. And I just so greatly appreciate what you're doing to help the collective consciousness. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yep. And thank you everybody for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please can subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.